One way to look at recruitment is to consider the model of job candidates as shoppers or prospective customers. Managers sometimes forget that there's a whole toolbox of resources they have to use to give reinforcement. Conducting an effective interview is one of your biggest tools in designing a method for more successfully choosing the right person for the job. By following these steps, overwhelmingly, we heard back from human resource professionals saying, yes, they are very dependable, loyal employees, great customer service skills. Because we look at any ethnic or racial group, we can always see that there are individuals within those groups with individual characteristics, individual motivations. Every generation has been frustrated with the youth of their day. And today's Generation X employees are no exception. We've heard every restaurant is on the lookout for productive, loyal employees. Hiring people with disabilities is another way for your establishment to meet its staffing goals. One way to look at recruitment is to consider the model of job candidates as shoppers or prospective customers. Consider that we are all shoppers of life experiences. We go through life pushing our shopping cart, wishing to fill that cart with the things we want and need: happiness, self-esteem, recognition, and satisfaction. Each of these items are purchases we make when we accept a job. And as job seekers, we are shoppers of that right purchase, the right job for us. Therefore, let's look at a brand new idea that has been thoroughly tested by examining 6 marketing principles that we can apply to recruitment today. The first principle is to target the market segment. And I love what McDonald's does in its advertising for customers. You know, it wants to sell hamburgers to the world, but it does it in a very targeted, segmented kind of way. For example, it has used Ronald McDonald to appeal to young people. It has developed Mac Tonight, appealing to the young adult. And it has different racial and ethnic groups represented, appealing to those potential customers. So what they have done, in effect, is to sell hamburgers to the world, but by targeting different market segments in its advertising. And that's the same thing we need to do in our recruitment advertising. We also want to think about who we are recruiting. One company I know of, for example, has found that they have better retention rates for their part-timers when they look at older workers and attract older workers. So you may want to consider who you're targeting and then target that individual that you're trying to reach by the medium that you use to advertise as well as the message. The next point that I'd like to make is we need to sell the opportunity. And unfortunately, many of us do this in the wrong way. As is shown in this example I'd like to share with you. It's in Connolly and Connolly's book called Competing for Employees. And in their chapter on recruiting, they say, can you imagine a marketing department running the following ad for customers? And it goes on to read, "Customers wanted, are you good enough to buy from us?" Wonderful Widgets Corporation, the world's best maker of things people need, has a product for a motivated customer who's good enough to buy from our hard-working, highly successful team. We need customers who are willing to work hard at using our challenging new products. We give every customer a different price depending upon their qualifications. Only experienced customers need apply. We are a very busy company, so please don't bother us in person or by telephone. Send your request to Wonderful Widgets Corporation, Customer Screening, Box 12, Central City, USA. So what we do need to do in our recruitment advertising is to sell the opportunity, which also means that we have to have something to sell and be ready to sell those opportunities in our recruitment messages. The third point I'd like to make is to make it easy for candidates to apply. For example, if you've been requiring that all job candidates send in resumes, you may want to reconsider. They may be putting up some barriers to some job seekers. Also, you may want to consider offering employment hours during weekend and evening hours. Also, perhaps adding an employment hotline or using clip-out coupons as part of your recruitment ad so that interested individuals can complete that and send that in for more information. The fourth point is to roll out the red carpet for job candidates. You know, recently a friend of mine went on a job interview. She had a great job but was interested in bettering herself. She had a great first interview and then was asked to wait for the hiring manager. She waited for an hour and a half. Now, she never did get that final interview, and she told me later, you know, Kathy, she said, I would never work for that company. If they treat me that way as a job applicant, how are they going to treat me as an employee? So we really do need to consider how we're treating our job applicants. You know, Disney does so many things so well, and one thing that they have always done is hired mystery shoppers that pose as job applicants to go through the employment process to see if job applicants are receiving that red carpet treatment. Now, I'm not suggesting you go out and hire mystery shoppers, but I am considering that you take a good hard look and see how candidates are treated. Point number 5 is to create the right image. You know, if you've ever looked for a home, you remember receiving the multiple listings booklet each week. Remember that home that's in there week after week after week? What do you start thinking about that home? Don't you start to wonder what's wrong with it? Let me ask you another question. What if your ad is running in the paper week after week after week? What do job applicants start thinking about your place of employment? That's right, they're probably thinking, what's wrong with it? So you want to consider how many times you are advertising in the paper and be sure that you're not creating an image of desperation. Now, what if you are somewhat desperate for help and you want to get the right candidates? Point number 6, use a variety of creative activities and messages. Don't rely on just one idea to be able to recruit all the people that you need. Consider telemarketing or telerecruiting, direct mail, radio, television, any number of activities to find the people that you need. You know, finding the right employees really is the competitive issue for the 1990s. It's like the old story of the 2 recruiters on a safari finding themselves face to face with a ferocious lion. One of the recruiters reached down to pull out a pair of running shoes, and his friend stated, "You've got to be crazy. You can't outrun that lion." The first recruiter replied, "I don't have to outrun the lion. I just have to outrun you." And so it is with recruitment today. If you don't have the best people working for your organization, the best people will be working for your competitors. Best of luck in developing effective staffing plans so that you'll be able to get the best.
Well, I'm Tim Sanford for American Financial Skylink, and joining me is Kathy Fyock, President of Innovative Management Concepts and author of Get the Best, a book on recruiting and hiring top-notch employees. Kathy, where does good customer service begin and why?
Several years ago, there was a Harvard Business Review article that talked about just this issue. And what this article said essentially was that good customer service began with treating your employees very well. And there's a model that they explored in this that essentially said that if we provide internal service quality, if we're treating our employees the way they want to be treated, if we're meeting their needs, that leads to employee satisfaction. People are happy, so therefore they are retained on the job. So we have less turnover and better employee retention. When we have employees on the job, doing the job, who know the job, they can then provide external service quality, which leads to customer satisfaction, which leads therefore to customer retention and therefore greater profitability. And assuming that employees share in the good things that happen to their company in some sort of way, directly or indirectly, that leads back into greater employee satisfaction. So this model really makes a lot of sense for businesses who want to do the best job in providing external services, let's look first at doing the best job for providing for our own employees.
Well, what you're suggesting here is that employers treat their employees like customers. Tell me a little more about this concept.
Well, it really makes sense when you think about it. In a way, we're all customers of life experiences. We're all sort of pushing our imaginary shopping cart through life, wanting to fill it with a series of needs things that meet our needs. And so as we look for a job, we're looking for a set of experiences that will meet our needs. So if we can look at employee relations, how we treat employees, and from that customer perspective, we're going to do a much better job of meeting their needs and therefore providing ultimately for external service quality.
All right, Kathy, our viewers have written down their top 10 needs, what they think employees are looking for. Why don't you tell us what the surveys found?
Great. Well, let me tell you first where this information came from. The source is the National Study of the Changing Workforce from the Families and Work Institute. And the question that was asked was, what are the reasons that individuals considered to be very important in deciding to take their current job? And I think you're going to be surprised at some of the answers. Number one, open communication. 65% individuals said that was very important. The second, effect on family and personal life, 60%. Next, nature of work, 59% that was very important in deciding to take their current job. Management quality came in at 59%. The supervisor, the individual I'll be working for, 58%. Control over work content was very important at number 55, or at 55%. Gaining new skills, 55%. Job security, 54%. Coworker quality at 53%, and job location, 50% indicated that was very important.
Well, Kathy, it looks like something was left off the list here. Where are salary and benefits in this?
Well, that's what everybody wants to know. Gee, they're not in the top 10, and they are not in the top 10. Now, they are in the top 20, but I think you might even be surprised at where they came in. Salary came in at number 16. 35% indicated that was very important. And benefits came in at number 13, with 43% indicating that was very important. So kind of a surprise there.
So does this mean if you have open communications and your supervisor's a swell guy that an employer doesn't need to be competitive in the terms of salary and benefits?
Absolutely not. Let me say that very clearly. What we can assume, too, we're looking at people who are moving from one job to another. And we can assume that people are only looking at jobs that are competitive in salary. They're not going to look at jobs that are not competitive, or they're not going to really be considering those. So that may be the reason we didn't see this rated higher. It's certainly something that people look at. People are not even going to consider jobs that are not competitive. But what it does mean is that ultimately there are many things that are equally or more important that we must consider as we look at employee relations strategies.
Well, open communication is number one on the list. How would a prospective employee know whether a company had open communication or a lot of the other things on this list?
It's a great question, and I have a lot of employers ask me that very same thing when we talk about this survey. And what we're finding is that, first of all, in the interview process, candidates are picking up information. They're asking questions. They're observing what's going on in the workplace. So they are evaluating what you have to offer as an employer in that forum. So you have to be on your toes and be sure that you are answering questions well in that selection interview, and making sure the climate is conducive to open communications and such. Furthermore, you as an employer have a reputation in your community, and that's going to come into play as people change jobs and as they decide, more importantly, whether to remain on the job or not. Selecting the right employee is a difficult decision, and one that takes careful preparation. Planning and preparing for the selection interview can help you in avoiding costly mistakes and choosing the right person the first time. In this session, we'll look at 5 ways to improve your interviewing so that you'll be able to select the best. Point number 1 is to plan for the interview. First of all, in addition to deciding in advance what it is that you're wanting to look for in candidates, you'll also want to prepare your questions in advance. I think it's very difficult to think of good interview questions on the spot. For example, if you're wanting to determine if someone has the rather subjective quality of leadership, it's hard to ask a question directly. For example, you're going to get an obvious answer if you say, "Are you a good leader?" You're going to get the obvious response, "Well, of course I am." So instead, you have to think about how you can ask that question in a way that will really give you a true and honest answer. You'll also want to think through the interview format. Consider what are all the questions you'll want to ask, and you'll also want to prepare the interviewing place to make sure that it's free from interruptions and distractions. Step number 2, you'll want to keep all of your questions job-related. Go back to your shopping list that you have determined what it is that you really want in the job candidate, and be sure that you're asking questions that get at how that candidate has the qualities that you're looking for. Point number 3 is ask open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are questions that begin with the words "tell me about," "describe," "why," "how," "compare," "contrast." All of those are excellent way to get an open-ended response. Questions that start with "do you," "are you," all give a one-word response that is not going to give you the same quality of information that you'll want to have. Step number 4 is to avoid hypothetical questions. Instead, ask behavioral questions. There's a basic problem with asking hypothetical questions, and that is you tend to get hypothetical answers. So instead of asking questions like, "What would you do if confronted with a difficult customer?" instead, ask questions that will tend to look at the person's past and see how they've handled that situation in their past experience. So instead of asking the question, "What would you do if confronted with a difficult customer?" instead ask the question, "Think about a time when you had to deal with a difficult customer, and what did you do, and what were the results?" A much better way of getting the information that you really do need. Point number 5, listen to the answers and probe for more information when necessary. Another good point for having written all of your questions in advance of the interview. I know it's very hard for me as an interviewer to be thinking up the next question while I'm really listening to the person give me their response. I usually have all of my questions listed in advance so that as someone is answering me, I can truly listen to their response and then also listen for clues in areas that I need to probe and ask more information. Sometimes individuals will give you little clues or hints as to a problem in their background or something you need to know more about as the manager or supervisor of that individual. So listen for those clues and be sure that you're asking probing questions that will give you more information. Conducting an effective interview is one of your biggest tools in designing a method for more successfully choosing the right person for the job. By following these steps, you'll be able to select the best.
In this session, we'll look at strategies for finding the gold in a graying America with specific tips on recruiting and hiring older adults. Joining me is Kathy Fyock, President of Innovative Management Concepts, a consulting firm specializing in solutions for an aging and changing workplace. Kathy is also author of America's Workforce is Coming of Age. Kathy, why are businesses turning to older workers? What are the qualities that make older adults appealing to business?
Well, first of all, let me just say that there are a growing number of older workers, and I think that's what we talk about when we talk about the graying of America. There are going to be a lot more older adults to rely on, and that's why it makes a lot of sense to turn to this labor market segment. In the next 20 years, we're going to see that one of every 4 employees, 25% are going to be over the age of 55. So it's a labor market segment we're going to have to come to terms with. But beyond just the fact of the sheer numbers of this group, what we're seeing is that they possess many of the qualities that businesses are looking for today. There was a recent survey that was conducted jointly by AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, and SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. And they asked human resource professionals, what about older workers? Do you think they're good employees? And overwhelmingly, we heard back from human resource professionals saying, yes, they are very dependable, loyal employees, great customer service skills. They really have experience, life experience that they bring to the job, which leads to better judgment, maturity. So many of the qualities that businesses are saying, yes, that's what we want in employees today.
Why do they work, or why would they want to come back to work?
Well, a fascinating survey was conducted by Carolyn Bird and reported in her book, Second Careers. And actually, she did this little survey in Modern Maturity magazine. Expected about 3,000 responses, and instead got back over 36,000 responses. So instead of writing a little follow-up article, she wrote this book. She asked older adults why they worked. I thought it was fascinating that 18% said they just liked working. 11% said they liked to be with people. 17% said they wanted to keep busy. 8% help others, and look at that, money. 38% were not surprised, and there were other reasons as well. But we're still finding that money is a key motivator, but notice that it's only 38%. It's not 100%. So we're finding that older adults are motivated to work for a number of different reasons, and those may be reasons that want to be highlighted in recruitment literature as well as in the recruiting campaign.
And this is also the generation, many of whom identify themselves by their job and where they work.
You bet. And what they do and having that purpose and that reason to get up every morning is very important.
What problems have older workers found when they've rejoined the workforce?
Well, I think that's a very individual kind of an issue, because many older adults don't leave for a long period of time. They're in there. They have great work habits. But others re-entering the workforce are maybe a little less sure of themselves, lack a little self-confidence, and especially if they have faced age discrimination in the past. So sometimes we just need to bolster their egos a bit, their self-esteem, give them reinforcement, and do some of those sorts of things when, especially when they're coming back after some absence from the workplace.
Can you give, in summary, can you give banks some specific tips that they can take with them from this segment in recruiting and hiring older adults?
Yes, I think first of all is to recognize that older adults have a great many attributes to offer in the workplace, and to start out with that understanding. Second is to really develop some targeted kinds of messages. Are you really appealing to that individual? So think about developing themes in your recruitment ads that would appeal to that older adult, not only in terms of the words that you choose, as we've just illustrated, but also, are you reaching out where older adults are in your community? For example, are you targeting mall walkers groups where there are a lot of active older adults, or coffee clutches where older adults meet and have coffee each day, obviously interested in that social interaction, going to community centers and so on. So thinking about specific ways to reach out to that population, because they may not be seeking you out specifically. You have to let them know.
Kathy Fyock with Innovative Management Concepts, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Skylink, and good luck to you in finding the gold in a graying America.
Have you ever been the different one in a crowd? I can recall being the only woman in an all-male meeting and wishing that I had some inkling of the football scores from the weekend before, even though I hate football. I can also remember being the only white speaker at an all-black seminar and wondering if I would be able to connect with my audience. I can also recall a situation in which I was the only American in an all-Japanese audience and feeling awkward when I was the only one laughing at the punchlines, which were in English. I guess every one of us at one time or another had been the only one, or the youngest, or the oldest, or in some way different. Being different separates us from the crowd. It makes us feel isolated, set apart, and often lonely. And we can be made to feel different by many characteristics: our gender, our age, our race, our heritage, our creed, or even our preferences. Remember, for example, the first time you had to room with someone other than a sibling. Or remember the first time you started living with someone. I can recall when I first became married and all the differences that we discovered in the way that we lived. You know, here was a man that I loved, that I thought I knew very well, and all of a sudden I found out that I didn't know him so well, and there were so many different things about the way we believed our home should be run. The way we celebrated holidays, for example, was a big issue for us in determining how we were going to act and what we were going to do. Because in effect, he was raised in one culture and I was raised in another culture, even though we were raised just 2 blocks apart from each other. So if marriage to someone can be so challenging, where the backgrounds are so similar, how much more difficult it is to work together with people that we don't necessarily love, but we do want to work together in a team environment. What are the steps then that we can take in dealing with differences in the workplace? Here are some guidelines for helping us in dealing with people who are different from us. First of all, don't make assumptions about others or stereotype others, because when we look at any ethnic or racial group, we can always see that there are individuals within those groups with individual characteristics, individual motivations, individual likes and dislikes. So we need to first of all recognize the differences within any group of co-workers. The second thing we might want to do is to work to include others, especially those who are different. You know, when we started out talking, we were talking about how individuals who are different can feel very isolated, very lonely at times from the rest of the group. So I think it's important that we work extra hard to be sure that these individuals are included in after-work activities, that we be sure that that invitation is extended to those individuals when we are having after-work social functions. We'll also want to appreciate the differences in those you work with and understand the value of these differences in going about your work. For example, you may find that the expertise of someone from one cultural background can be very, very helpful as you deal with issues and dealing with customers from that background. You can learn a lot about customers' likes and dislikes, customs and mores, when you get to know the culture of your coworkers. Now, what if it's a situation where you are the different one? What are the steps that you can take? Well, I think first of all, it's important that we educate others about our culture. We let others know about what our customs and mores are and how we might be able to work more effectively with each other. If, for example, English is a second language, you may want to let others know when you need help in learning a term or knowing the proper word to use for something, and to let others know also when you don't completely understand a point or an issue. Another point is to be sure that you show an appreciation for others' cultures and demonstrate respect. To try and find out more about the culture of your coworkers and be able to work more harmoniously together. Also, let others know about your differences and how they can be of added value in the workplace. For example, by sharing information on dealing with that customer of a different cultural background, you can show your coworkers how you can help them in the workplace as well. By following these guidelines, you'll be able to work more effectively with your restaurant team. You'll appreciate the differences in others, and you'll be better able to value the contributions that those differences make.
Hi, I'm Tim Sanford for American Financial Scaling. Joining me is Kathy Fyock, President of Innovative Management Concepts. Kathy is also the author of a modular training program entitled Bridging the Age Gap. What exactly are Generation Xers?
When we talk about Generation X, we're really talking about young workforce entrants, sometimes called the baby buster generation or the 20-something generation. A lot of different terms for this group, but basically the young workforce entrants that many managers are needing to manage effectively these days.
Is Generation X really that different from the youth of yesterday?
Well, I have to say that every generation has been frustrated with the youth of their day, and today's Generation X employees are no exception. We've heard them called lazy, arrogant, cynical. But, you know, when we look back at what generations have said in the past, it's not that much different.
Well, why are managers so frustrated with Generation X employees?
Well, I think that managers have reason to be frustrated today, and it doesn't help too much just to say, well, every generation has had problems. Specific things that we're seeing, for example, in the interview situation, the youth come in and they're turning the tables and they're interviewing their manager. And managers are taken aback by this. They're not used to having the tables turn. Furthermore, managers are offering jobs, making job offers to young people, and young people are saying, no, I'll have to think about that. Turning down offers many times because they have many job offers from which to select. Even when they do accept an offer, there's no guarantee that they'll show up for work. We're hearing of a lot of managers say, gee, I made the offer, they seemed excited, they said, yeah, I'm ready to come in. They never show up, they never call, we never hear from them again. Or another scenario is when we bring them in for the orientation and they do show up. We're real excited when that happens. But we have a lunch break, and after lunch we never see the new employee again. Furthermore, we're seeing individuals with values and workplace expectations that are dramatically different from either the baby boomer or the traditionalist generation. And that is really causing both those older generations to wring their hands and say, woe is me, and ain't it awful. It's very frustrating.
Kathy, what can managers do, and maybe what should they do to better manage Generation X?
Well, I have a list here of different things that managers can do, very specific tips for managing this generation. First of all, consider their values. Understand where they're coming from. This may be the most important thing that we can do as managers, is to just understand the values. Also, think back to when you were not a member of management. Some of us who have been managers, part of that management team for a long period of time, have sort of forgotten what it feels like to be an employee, so that's important. Strengthen your orientation program. You want to strengthen that opportunity to bond with the new employee. Very important. Be clear with your expectations and give feedback. Spend quality and quantity time with the Generation X employees. Provide ongoing training and learning opportunities. These folks like to learn, so give them what they need. Have fun. Take time to make work a little more fun. Show this generation the whys. Why are they learning something? Why are they doing something? They need to be told the whys behind what they're doing. Be flexible with work schedules. This is a group that values time with their families and is going to put family first, so it's best to be flexible with them. Earn their respect and show them that you respect them as well. be a mentor or provide a mentor for young people. They like to have that bonding and that relationship. Add job variety, because these are individuals who want choices and want to be more marketable. And finally, link them with your organization's mission. Again, let them see why you're doing what you're doing, and they'll feel more part of the organization. There is some value in the values of Generation X. I think, first of all, they bring to the workplace a sense of balance, a sense of priority, a sense of what should be important in life, which is good sometimes for us workaholics to get that sense of balance and to put others first, because these are definitely relationship individuals who value relationships. And those things are not all bad, and we can look at those as maybe some positive elements being added to the workplace. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. As of July of 1992, every business with more than 25 employees must provide equal employment opportunities to those individuals who have disabilities. And beyond that, since every restaurant is on the lookout for productive, loyal employees, hiring people with disabilities is another way for your establishment to meet its staffing goals. Today, we'll be exploring the issues of what people with disabilities really can do. The answer is almost anything. The restaurant industry has an excellent record of employing people with many different types of disabilities and in many different roles. In fact, many restaurant managers refer to people with disabilities as people with capabilities. What are some of the guidelines in working with people with disabilities? Here are some ideas for working more effectively with these important colleagues. First of all, don't make assumptions about what fellow employees can and can't do. I know it's really easy sometimes when you are not familiar with working with someone with a disability to know what they can do and what they can't do. I know in my own experience in working in a restaurant environment, I found that I was surprised sometimes about what people with disabilities could and couldn't do. For example, I recall one individual with just one arm was able to prepare almost any item in the restaurant. I'm also familiar with one employee who was able to, even though she was mentally disabled, she was able to prepare product more quickly than any other employee in the restaurant. This was because she was ambidextrous. She had some capabilities that really helped overcome some of the disabilities that she had. The second point is ask a coworker with a disability how you might work more effectively together. I can think of an example, for instance, of one individual who was hearing impaired, and I was conducting an interview with him. I wasn't really sure how we might best communicate together, so I just asked him, and we started talking about it. He shared with me that one of the things we needed to do was be sure, first of all, that I was looking at him when I was speaking, and that I was speaking very clearly in terms of so he could read my lips more effectively. So just by having that bit of communication prior to the interview, we were able to have a very successful discussion together. Another issue, consider ways to accommodate the needs of coworkers with disabilities. You may want to ask that individual how they might best be able to do the job. For example, I know one individual who has arthritis in her hands, and she finds that just by using a pair of tweezers, she's more effectively able to do some of the fine motor skills that she's required to do in a restaurant environment. Another tip, avoid patronizing behavior. Now, what is patronizing behavior? Well, it can be talking down to a colleague. It can be just not treating them as you would another colleague within the restaurant. What you want to do is treat everybody like they're part of the team and not talk down to anyone. And be sure to include the person with a disability in social and after work hours activities. People with disabilities want to feel that they are being included in activities. They want to be a part of the team. So be sure that you are working with people with disabilities in those kinds of ways and including them in those after-work social and get-together times. Something else that we'll want to do is avoid demeaning language. And let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. One basic rule of communications is use people-first language. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. For example, we'll want to say things that include the person first and then refer to their disability. So instead of saying disabled people, we'll want to say people with disabilities or workers with disabilities. In this way, we put the person first before their disability. So use people-first language. The second tip is to use the terms that are more commonly accepted by people within the disabled community. For example, avoid the term handicapped. I guess this goes back to the original derivation of that term when the term handicapped meant cap in hand or begging for a job and for wages. So instead, the word disabled is much more accepted. So use the word disabled. Some other terms we might want to avoid. Consider the term confined to a wheelchair. It's much more positive to say uses a wheelchair. Also, we'll want to avoid the term victims. Instead, call them people with disabilities. We'll also want to avoid terms like deaf and dumb that are obviously negative, and instead use terms like hearing and speech impaired. Also, we'll want to avoid terms like retard or retarded, and instead use the term mentally disabled. By following these steps, you'll find that you'll be able to not only meet the guidelines established in the Americans with Disabilities Act, but you'll also be able to work more effectively with a large segment of the American population that is ready and willing to work. By following these guidelines, you'll be able to not only work more effectively with people with disabilities, but you'll be able to see that these are people with capabilities.